Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar. A spoonful of olive oil makes the vegetables go down, the health benefits of cooking with extra virgin olive oil. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Oldways, we are a nonprofit nutrition education organization whose mission is to inspire people to embrace the healthy and sustainable joys of the old ways of eating. So heritage-based diets, high in taste, nourishment, sustainability, and joy. Since 1990, we've helped people live healthier, happier lives by offering educational programs, resources, and recipes based on shared cultural food traditions from around the world. So thank you all again for being here for this webinar. Definitely please join us. We've got another webinar coming up next week and then one the week after that. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Yes, this session is being recorded. The video recording and the slides will be posted on our website within 1 week, and we'll send you an email within 1 week sharing the recording and slides, as well as the CPEU certificate for registered dietitians. You can find out more about our upcoming webinars by visiting our website, oldwayspt.org/CPEU. And we will have time to take question and answer at the end of this webinar. So you can type in your questions as you think of them into the chat box on Zoom. And I would also like to give a huge thank you to the North American Olive Oil Association for sponsoring this session. So with that, our first presenter will be Joseph Profaci. So he is joining us live today, but he is going to share a pre-recorded video because his service was a little bit spotty where he is. So let me just pull this up. Okay.
Olive Oil 101, 3 basic issues. Hi, I'm Joseph Profaci. I'm the Executive Director of the North American Olive Oil Association. Our association is an organization made up of importers, producers, distributors, marketers, everybody who's concerned about bringing olive oil to the American and Canadian markets. Our overarching goal is to grow consumption in the United States, and one of the primary ways we do that is through education and by holding the NAOOA out as an authoritative voice on all things olive oil. So I'm really thrilled to be here today on a panel with such distinguished scholars as Frank Hugh and Rosa Lamuela Ravinta. And I want to thank Oldways for making this happen today. So in a presentation today, I will try to quickly get through what I call Olive Oil 101, and we're going to talk about 3 issues: the cultivation of olives for olive oil, the production of olive oils, and olive oil standards. These are, to me, the things that you really need to understand to talk about olive oil intelligently. To help illustrate these issues, I'm going to share a video with you, and I'm going to pause it at appropriate moments and fill in a little information. Okay, so let's get started right away, and we're going to, once the video starts, before it starts, I want to give you a little background on the first segment, because the first segment is the longest piece, and it's about the cultivation of olives for olive oil. So some basic facts you may want to know as background is that olive trees, they're grown primarily in the Mediterranean countries, but also now in North and South America, China, South Africa, and even Japan. To grow olives for olive oil, you need to have a climate that has cool or cold winters, but not sustained freezing. Olive trees are drought resistant, but you still do need some water for fruit production. And there are approximately 1,000 varieties of olive trees being produced around the world today, all of which are, by the way, non-genetically modified. And considered together, those 1,000 varieties, they make up the world's largest permanent crop of any agricultural product. Okay, so you'll also see in this video that there are 3 basic cultivation methods. They are all 3 still in use today, but the latter 2 are becoming more and more prevalent. So there's traditional, in which the trees were allowed to grow. They're separated far apart so they could grow laterally. Then there's high density, where the trees are brought together to make efficiencies in harvest, so they're closer, they're in rows. And finally, a newer method, super high density, in which the olives are cultivated to actually grow in hedgerows, and to make cultivation and harvesting that much easier. Okay, let's get started. Okay, the first video will cover the cultivation of olives.
Civilizations have been producing olive oil for thousands of years. In the most simple terms, olive oil is the consumable liquid extracted from crushed olives. Traditional methods of obtaining olive oil date back to ancient times, and the process didn't change very much until the 20th century. Today, production technology is becoming more and more advanced, allowing suppliers to provide better quality olive oil than ever before. Olive oil starts in the groves, where olives grow on trees before being harvested. Traditional olive groves often contain trees that are hundreds of years old, spaced far enough apart that the branches expand broad and wide. These trees were typically harvested by hand, and today are harvested with a combination of people and tools, such as handheld shakers, nets, and tractors, depending on the landscape. In the last few decades, new plantings typically opt for a more efficient, high-density layout, where the trees are closer together in order to allow faster harvesting using mechanical harvesters such as the trunk shaker and umbrella-style catcher. The newest type of grove is a super high-density layout, where trees are planted hedgerow-style and can be harvested very quickly using a machine that drives over the top of the trees and catches the olives on a conveyor within the unit. In the northern hemisphere, including the Mediterranean basin, the harvest runs from October through the following January, depending on the weather, region, and olive variety. In the southern hemisphere, the harvest runs from April through July.
Okay, so that's a little summary of shows the different methods of harvesting. You could see the trees that were planted in rows, and then of course those large tractors that run over the hedgerows in the super high density. The video will continue next, and we'll get into the production of olive oils, and the olives are taken to the mill. And again, everything is geared towards increasing and improving the quality of the oil. So you'll see that in modern methods of production, those stone mills have been replaced, the mats have been eliminated, and screw presses that used to be used have been replaced using centrifugal force, centrifugal presses.
After the olives are collected, they are delivered to a mill for processing. Depending on the region of the world and the size of the local industry, mills may be small neighborhood centers or large industrial facilities. In either case, the general production process is the same. First, the olives are separated from any branches, leaves, or debris and sprayed or washed, but only with water. Next, the olives are crushed to form a paste. Traditionally, this was done with stone crushers, but modern machines such as hammer mills and grinders have replaced stones today. After crushing, the paste goes through a malaxation phase, which basically stirs the mixture in preparation for extracting the liquids. At this point, the solids and liquids, including both water and oil, are separated from the paste. From the 17th century until as recently as the 1940s, extracting the liquids was accomplished with an olive press that would squeeze the paste on baskets or mats to press out the liquid. Today, millers rely on advanced decanting and centrifugation machines which help gravity work more quickly by spinning the mixture to generate the separation. After the initial liquids are separated from the solids, a vertical centrifuge can separate any excess water from the oil. Lastly, excess sediment is usually removed from the oil within 24 to 48 hours before the oil goes to its final storage tank.
Okay, so moving on now to the next segment of the video, we'll talk a little bit about standards. And the video goes pretty quickly, so I'm going to give you a little more background here. right off the bat, they're going to talk about the International Olive Council, the IOC. So the IOC is a UN chartered organization whose members are countries. The IOC's main purpose and function is to establish standards for olive oils, determining what constitutes olive oils, how you make olive oil, what constitutes extra virgin. And those standards are being used as references to other standards around the world that are in place, whether it's the Codex Alimentarius, the country standards around the world, even some of the states in the United States that have standards. Currently, there is no mandatory national standard in the United States, and the industry is petitioning the FDA to establish one. So we'll get started on the next slide. Before I hit go, I want you to just keep this image of the storage tanks in mind, because we're going to talk about them later.
Oil that meets the International Olive Council chemical and sensory criteria for extra virgin olive oil or virgin olive oil is now ready to be blended or bottled.
Okay, so there we had that the oil that meets the standards for virgin or extra virgin, they're ready to be bottled. Well, so what does extra virgin really mean? To qualify as extra virgin under the IOC standard and the standards around the world, it's basically the same. They must be unrefined, number one. The oil must be unrefined, no processing other than filtration. They must meet strict chemical parameters, quality parameters, and purity parameters. Be free of sensory defects as determined by expert taste panels. And this actually sets olive oil apart from any other food in the world where the grading is based on sensory perception. One thing to be clear, the term extra in extra virgin, it means special. It does not mean that the oil is more virgin than any other virgin oil. Okay, so here, remember, extra means special virgin oil. And finally, it's worth pointing out that, as with wines, the extra virgin olive oil category is broad, and you can have various qualities that go from good to better to best. Okay. All right. You may have also wondered, what's with the blue glass, right? As we mentioned, sensory panels determine grade. Sensory panels are by nature subjective, and they are subject to biases. So one of the principal biases that have been identified and can be eliminated is color. Our natural bias is that green oils are better than yellow oils, when in fact that is not necessarily the case. Color has nothing to do with flavor or aroma. So the blue or red glass will neutralize the color, eliminating that potential type of bias. You may also wonder, okay, if the oil is ready to be qualified and bottled as virgin, as extra virgin olive, what if it's not extra virgin? What happens to it? So if the oil has only, let's say, minor defects of taste or chemical makeup, that oil can still be bottled as virgin, and that's sold as virgin virgin oil in many countries, although not in the United States. It's an excellent choice for cooking, often more inexpensive than extra virgin. If, however, the defects in that oil are significant, if they're major, then the oil has to be refined. And an industrial process removes the defects, the color and flavor defects, and creates a neutral flavored oil. Under olive oil standards, however, the process must preserve the natural, healthy fatty acid profile that is olive oil. All of the most commonly used cooking oils in the United States are refined, and that includes canola, corn, grapeseed, sunflower, and the vast majority of avocado oil. Okay, let's finish up with this video, and we'll talk about the refined oils.
Oil with chemical or extreme sensory defects is refined to move negative odors and flavors. Refined olive oil is blended with virgin or extra virgin olive oil to add flavor and antioxidants back before being sold as olive oil.
Okay, and that's the end of that video, and which lives on our website aboutoliveoil.org, where we have lots of other information. Last thing I want to leave you with today is a discussion about harvest dates and best before dates. You may read that you should only buy an olive oil if it has a harvest date on the bottle. That's really not good advice, and let me explain to you why. First of all, no US standard or any standard really requires a harvest date or even a best before date. And the reason that you may not see a harvest date is because harvest dates can be confusing to the consumer who doesn't understand how olive production, the ins and outs of olive oil production. So a large company, for instance, may blend oils from multiple harvest dates during that same harvest year, sometimes even from a different harvest, right? So for instance, we talked about the fact that there are harvests going on in northern and some southern hemispheres in the same year. And those can be several months apart. So it just could be confusing to put on the label. The other thing that I want to point out, I mentioned those storage tanks. So in modern technology allows the producer of olive oils to store the oil after it's produced in a protected environment. The three enemies of olive oil: heat, light, and oxygen, right? So in those tanks, they're temperature controlled. There's a blanket of inert gas like nitrogen that's put over the tank to protect the oil from oxygen. And of course, there's no light getting into those tanks. So that oil that's in those tanks after production, it's preserved and its properties remain very solid for a good period of time. That's why a best before date is always important to know, because here the manufacturer knows which oils are going into the bottle, how long it's been stored, what's its likely extended shelf life. IOC recommends no more than 2 years of shelf life after you bottled the oil, and the North American Olive Oil Association members have adopted that. All that said, I want to point out, I don't want to forget this, harvest date is good information if it is provided in a clear fashion. And this, for instance, if you're buying a best quality olive oil that you want to use for condiment use or for dipping, the most recent harvest date is going to be more important to you than if you're buying extra virgin olive oil for everyday cooking. Okay. That's it. I don't have time to go through this slide. It's something that's on our website. I encourage you to come to the website and explore. This shows the comparisons of the two types of cooking oils you find on the shelf. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Profaci, for that great presentation. So what we're going to do next is we have Dr. Lamuela Raventos here to do a presentation. So I will hand it over to her. Thank you.
Hello. Well, thank you very much for this invitation. It is a pleasure for me to present here in Oldways. I will share with you my screen to see if that everything is working. You cannot see, no, it? I don't know what is happening. Sorry. Yes. I'm sorry, I don't know what is happening now. When I put all the screen, the image disappears. And now it's going well.
Looks great.
Thank you. Well, extra virgin olive oil, it's a traditional food that it has been consumed during all of our history, or the Mediterranean history. It's very typical of the Mediterranean diet, and it's distinguished by its high content of nutritional and antioxidant compounds compared to other vegetables oils. If we see the composition, I will not explain very much this because this is a very chemical thing. However, we have to think that this mostly there are triglycerides, and the main fat is oleic acid, that it is a monounsaturated fat, and what it distinguishes this oil from other oils is its minor fraction. Also that it's monounsaturated, this is important, the fat, but also its minor fraction. It's very important, the phenolic fraction that we will focus today. However, it also has other minor compounds and triterpenics, tocopherol, that is vitamin E, hydrocarbons, pigments, and esterols that can also have healthy properties in oil. We have to think that extra virgin olive oil have nowadays two claims, one in the United States for their MUFA or their oleic acid content, and another that is from Europe, from the EFSA, that is for the polyphenols content. We have to think that there are not many foods that have a health claim, because you have to have a lot of demonstrated healthy properties to have a health claim in your food. And virgin olive oil have one. It has a lot of healthy properties. Nowadays, we know in mortality, especially in cardiovascular disease. However, there are studies about their neuroprotective effects, anti-inflammatory effects, also some studies about anti-cancer properties, especially breast cancer. However, here, I would like to focus in virgin olive oil in cooking. We have to think that extra virgin olive oil serves as a heat transfer. However, as has been mentioned before by Joseph, it's transformed due to temperature and to oxygen. And both amino fractions, the triglycerides and the minor compounds, change during cooking. And we have also to consider that I will present some of the studies that we have performed, that there is interaction between extra virgin olive oil and the food that you cook virgin olive oil. And here is a study that we perform. Here we perform like a pan frying, that is the typical Mediterranean way of cooking. And we use two temperatures. Before, like we cook a chicken and we cook potatoes to see which were the temperatures and the time. So we use like the normal time, like to have it very cooked and to have it like a dente regular, no? And we use two different times for at 120, at 30 minutes and 60 minutes, and for 170, we cook at 15 minutes and 30 minutes. We perform a liquid extraction, that is a very chemical procedure, and we analyze this olive oil after these cooking process. And here are the phenolics. Here are the phenolics. Here, well, we will focus only on the addition of all phenolics. This will be the saccharidoids that are the most important ones, but it's more or less the same. That here will be the extra virgin olive oil when it's raw. Here, when we cook at 120, and here at 120, 60 minutes and 30 minutes. Here we see that there is not much difference. When you see the same letter, is that there is not much difference. And here, if we cook more at higher temperature, there is more decrease in these compounds, because these compounds are sensible to temperature. However, they were not so sensible to time, as we observed in this figure. However, what it was important for us is that after cooking, we use an extra virgin olive oil that was rich in phenolics. However, after cooking, we observed that the same levels that the European regulations regulates that you have to have in an extra virgin olive oil to have a health claim, after cooking it, we have this value of polyphenols. We have still this value. So it's important to use olive oils that are rich in phenolic compounds, because phenolic compounds are antioxidants and protects during cooking this oil. So what we concluded is that during cooking at this temperature, there was a decrease in the phenolics. However, as we use a virgin olive oil that was rich in phenolic compounds, we still can say that this oil has a health properties, no? That accomplish what European Union says that we have to accomplish to have a health claim. And we continue with other studies. What we wanted to perform, this was a crossover design with 40 volunteers. And what we wanted to check is that if using extra virgin olive oil could increase the viability of tomato compounds. Tomato is very rich in antioxidants, and it's a very interesting fruit or vegetable. And for that, what we use is 500 grams of tomato, 250, now I will show that we prepare these sauces by ourselves, and 250 grams of tomato. All the volunteers have to follow they have all the 3 interventions with olive oil. And we are lucky that we have, like in our department, people who are cooking or processing foods. So we use the same tomatoes with the same quality. So we could control all the process, no? We control all the process to do our sauces. And here in one, we add the olive, as we mentioned, and in the other, no? We finish, we wait, and we cold storage until the volunteers had these sauces or the raw tomato. Here we have the phenolic composition. I will not explain that because this is very boring. However, I would like to show you that sometimes the people think that when you cook, you lose phenolics. However, we observe in some of them is right that when you cook, because of the heat, you lose some phenolics, some of the phenolics that were present in tomato. However, there were ones that when you cook, you observe an increase in these phenolics. We observe like they are more released from the tomato. Before doing the intervention, the volunteers have to be 3 days without having antioxidant food. They have to be 3 days without having fruit and vegetables, without having wine, extra virgin olive oil, coffee. This really is hard. I have been participating in some of these studies because without coffee, this is really very hard, especially in the mornings. And what we did is we take plasmas and we take urine of these volunteers. And what we observe is that after the addition of oil, instead, this will be plasma, the plasma viability, the plasma absorption of these compounds. And instead of having one peak, we observe a double peak. That this is very interesting. I will explain you. This is a polyphenol, a phenolic compound that is present in tomato, and we observe that in several compounds. And here are the results of the plasma in general, and here is the result. In red will be tomato, in orange will be tomato sauce, and in yellow, tomato sauce made with olive. And in general, what we observe is that when you cook the tomato, these compounds are more available in plasma. And when we observe these results in urine, this will be in urine. Here we have the results from men and women. What we observe here is the tomato. Here is the tomato sauce without olive oil, and here the tomato sauce. That these compounds increase when you add olive oil. That's what it means, that these compounds were more time in your body, were more time, and these compounds are antioxidants. They have health properties. So they were more time in the body doing their effect. However, we wanted to go further and not only to look which were the compounds in urine and blood, to see if they have any effect on health. And we studied anti-inflammatory properties of these blood samples, and what these are anti-inflammatory molecules, and where they are down, it seems that they have better anti-inflammatory properties. And what we observe, that in general, the yellow, that is the one tomato sauce with olive oil, in all of them, they decrease more. And we have to think that the 3 foods that we were giving, the 3 were healthy, that however, when you add oil, you have also healthier properties. And this molecule, when you have higher, is better. And why this it happens? Then we did a fraction to try to fraction. Why that's happening is because some compounds that are present in tomato, when you add oil, they'll go to the oil phase, and they are more bioavailable. You absorb them better. And this is very important because then they have more effect in the body. However, we wanted to go to more complex food. And to go to more complex food, we did a study with sofrito. Sofrito is a typical Mediterranean diet. I done sauce made with tomato, also virgin olive oil, also with onions, and also sometimes you add garlic and sometimes you don't add garlic. And initially what we did is we take samples of sofrito from Barcelona market and surroundings. And what we observed, when the sofrito was made with extra virgin olive oil and was made with onions, you had higher antioxidant activity. And when you used sunflower oil, it has lower antioxidant activity. However, we wanted to go further, and like we have these people that works with cooking, we did like a very controlled design, and we worked with 2 oils concentration at 5 and 10%, making our sofritos, and 20 and 40% of onions, also garlic at 2 concentrations, and we worked also at 2 times. And what was the curious thing? That when we add extra virgin olive oil and onions, we observed that there was a synergistic effect among ingredients. So the effect of this ingredient, in this case was lycopene, that is the main pigment on tomato, increases and it was more bioavailable. So you could have more effect of the lycopene when you add onion and when you add virgin olive oil. However, I wanted to go further, and not myself because I don't work with animals, but with a collaboration. We did a study with rats, and we worked with obese rats and with lean rats. And these ones were controls and one with sofrito. And according to these are vascular values. When you add sofrito to the feed, to the food of these rats, they were behaving as they were lean, as they were more healthy. However, what was more curious for us is that the rats that were having sofrito, they were having more calories, no? Because sofrito has calories. However, when you observe the body weight, there was not an increase in body weight. So sofrito was increasing like the metabolism of the rat, and the weight or the calories that they were having more, they were not affecting to the weight of the rats. However, we wanted to go further, and we did a study of sofrito in 22 men, in 22 volunteers. They were students. And for me, this is interesting because many times we perform studies with people that is at high risk of cardiovascular disease or high risk of obesity, but these were totally healthy men, young men, students. And what we did is they were coming at our nutritional clinics. We gave them sofritos, we take blood samples and urine samples, and 24 hours after, we take blood samples again and urine. And what we observed, that only taking 1 portion of sofrito, was a big portion, but 1 portion, there was an increase on carotenoids, that, for example, lycopene, that is present in tomato. But however, with only 1 portion, there was a decrease in the anti-inflammatory properties and an increase in the polyphenols excretion. So with only 1 portion, you observe a healthy effects in healthy volunteers. That for me this is very important, because in healthy volunteers sometimes it's more difficult to observe any effect. So what could be for me the most important take-home message of this, no? That the presence of extra virgin olive oils enhances the viability of bioactive compounds present in foods, as for example in tomato, no? That the tomato sofrito sauce made with extra virgin olive oil has shown the ability to improve the vascular function and the weight in animals models, and to decrease the inflammatory status in healthy individuals. Moreover, we did this year a review of all the health benefits that could have to cook with extra virgin olive oil. And what we can say of the conclusion of the review that we did, the minor compounds are transferred to the food, and it decreases the oxidation of this food, that phytochemicals migrate to extra virgin olive oil, and this increases the viability and stability of these antioxidants. And this for me is very important. The phenolic compounds that are antioxidants prevent the formation of undesirable compounds as acrylamida and also other possible toxic substances, because phenolic compounds are antioxidants and are protecting the possible formation of toxic substance. Here, I would like to thank all the research group because here all the results are made because there are many people working in our research lab, people from all the world. We have people from Venezuela, Mexico, from Colombia, from Egypt, and I think this is very enrich a lot our group. And finally, I would like to thank all of you. And if you want to follow us, we try to be very active in Twitter, in LinkedIn, and also in our website. So thank you to all of you. And I would finish, and I would go on the presentation.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. Just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type those into the Q&A, and Dr. Lamuela Raventos and also Mr. Joseph Profaci will have time to answer those at the end. I'm now going to share our final presentation, and our final speaker today is Dr. Frank Hu of the Harvard School of Public Health. And so with that, here we go.
I'm Frank Hu, Professor of Nutrition and Epidemiology, Chair of Department of Nutrition at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. It's my pleasure to give a presentation on olive oil consumption, body weight, and longevity. It is now well recognized that the traditional Mediterranean diet is a healthy eating pattern. It has been associated with decreased risk of chronic disease and the increased longevity in many populations. This dietary pattern is characterized by high intake of plant-based foods such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and also olive oil, moderate consumption of dairy products, fish, and poultry, lower consumption of red meat, sweets, and other highly processed foods. Many epidemiological studies have examined the association between adherence to Mediterranean diet and the risk of chronic disease and mortality. This is one of the first studies conducted in the Greek population. This study used a 9-item score to measure adherence to Mediterranean diet, and the higher score reflect greater adherence to the traditional Mediterranean diet. In this study, increased adherence to Mediterranean diet is associated with decreased mortality and increased survival in a Greek population. And one of the main components of this score is higher monounsaturated fat to saturated fat ratio, which reflects increased intake of olive oil and the lower consumption of animal products. In this meta-analysis, authors summarized data from more than 10 different cohorts on the adherence to Mediterranean diet and the risk of cardiovascular disease. In this meta-analysis, for every 2-point increment in the Mediterranean diet score, there was a 13% reduction in CVD risk. The results are highly consistent across different populations. Olive oil is a hallmark of traditional Mediterranean diet. It was known as the liquid gold since ancient times. This picture depicts cultivation of olive trees and consumption of olive oil in ancient Greece. This olive tree is the oldest olive tree in the island, on the island of Crete in Greece, and it's more than 3,000 years old. It still produces high quality olives and olive oil. It's truly a gift to humanity and also to the environment, because olive trees contribute to the preservation of natural resources and the biodiversity. Spain has the largest production of olive oil, followed by Greece, Italy, and Turkey. Compared to those countries, the olive oil production in the US is very small. Nevertheless, consumption of olive oil has increased dramatically in the US population in the past several decades. And most of the olive oil is imported from European countries. There are two major types of olive oil, virgin or extra virgin olive oil. The oil is extracted directly from mechanically pressing ripe olives without heat or chemicals. Refined olive oil is a blend of virgin olive oil and the refined olive oil, which is extracted by heat or using chemicals. The quality of actual virgin olive oil is the highest in terms of the amount of polyphenols and also flavor, aroma. Virgin olive oil has slightly lower quality, and the refined olive oil has much lower quality compared to either virgin olive oil or extra virgin olive oil. All olive oils have high amount of monounsaturated fat, which is a healthy type of fat. And extra virgin or virgin olive oil have high amount of polyphenols, including phenolic acid and alpha tocopherol and other bioactive compounds. Monounsaturated fat and polyphenols and other bioactive compounds can work together to improve cardiometabolic health, including reducing oxidative stress, reducing chronic inflammation, improving endothelial function, lipid profile, and blood pressure. The strongest evidence to support the health benefits of Mediterranean diet come from the PREDIMED trial, which is a landmark study that included more than 7,000 participants from Spain. They were randomized to 3 groups: a control diet, Mediterranean diet intervention group supplemented with extra virgin olive oil, and traditional Mediterranean diet intervention group supplemented with mixed nuts. In this study, the investigators used the 14-item score to monitor adherence to the Mediterranean diet intervention. This score included 2 items on olive oil consumption. First is the olive oil as main culinary fat. The other one is olive oil consumption at least 4 tablespoons per day. After 4.5 years of intervention compared to the control diet, the Mediterranean diet intervention groups supplemented with either extra virgin olive oil or mixed nuts had 30% reduction in cardiovascular disease risk. This interventions also reduced risk of type 2 diabetes and other chronic diseases. So far, the majority of evidence to support the benefit of Mediterranean dietary pattern or olive oil consumption in the context of the Mediterranean dietary pattern come from European populations. The evidence is quite limited in the US population because consumption of olive oil is very low in the US. In the past several decades, we have been conducting 3 large cohort studies at the Harvard School of Public Health and the Brigham Women's Hospital. Those are Nurses Health Study, Nurses Health Study 2, and the Health Professional Follow-up Study. In those 3 cohorts, we have followed more than 300,000 participants for 3 to 4 decades. Every 4 years, we have collected detailed information on diet and lifestyle factors. Those repeated measures have allowed us to reduce measurement errors in dietary assessments and also measure long-term habitual dietary intakes of macronutrients and different food groups. Since 1990, we have begun to collect dietary intake of olive oil in all 3 cohorts every 4 years. So using those data, we have conducted a detailed analysis on olive oil consumption and the risk of chronic diseases in our cohorts. In this study, we analyzed the association between olive oil consumption and the risk of cardiovascular disease in 3 cohorts. And we found that higher olive oil intake was associated with lower risk of total CVD, especially coronary heart disease in our cohort studies, compared with lung consumers, those with higher olive oil intake, at least 1/2 tablespoon per day, or 7 grams per day at 14% lower risk of CVD. We also found that higher olive oil intake was associated with lower levels of circulating inflammatory biomarkers and a better lipid profile, consistent with results from intervention studies. We estimated that replacing 5 grams per day of margarine, butter, mayonnaise, or dairy fat with equivalent amount of olive oil was associated with 5 to 7% lower risk of CVD. We conducted similar analysis on olive oil consumption and the risk of type 2 diabetes, and similar to what we found for cardiovascular disease, for type 2 diabetes, we found that consuming at least 1/2 tablespoon per day was associated with about 10% lower risk of developing diabetes. We estimate that substituting olive oil for margarine, butter, or mayonnaise was associated with significant lower risk of type 2 diabetes. Recently, we published a paper on olive oil consumption and the risk of total and of course specific mortality in our cohorts. Compared with those who never or rarely consume olive oil, those in the highest categories of olive oil consumption at least 1/2 tablespoon per day had about 20% lower risk of total and CVD mortality, 17% lower risk of cancer mortality, 29% lower risk of neurodegenerative mortality, and 18% lower risk of respiratory mortality. We estimated that substituting 10 grams per day of other fats, including margarine, butter, mayonnaise, and dairy fat with olive oil was associated with significant reduction in total and of course specific mortality. In this study, olive oil consumption was very low, and that's why we could only look at 1/2 tablespoon per day in relation to risk of chronic diseases and mortality. And also in our cohorts, we didn't distinguish extra virgin olive oil from refined olive oil. There are several potential biological mechanisms through which olive oil consumption may reduce risk of mortality. As I mentioned earlier, olive oil contains high amounts of monounsaturated fat, which is a healthy type of fat. Virgin olive oil or extra virgin olive oil also contain high amount of polyphenols and other bioactive compounds, which have been shown to reduce oxidative stress, reduce chronic inflammation, improve healthy gut microbiota, and also improve blood lipids, blood pressure, and insulin sensitivity. One concern about olive oil is that high-fat foods such as olive oil and other foods like nuts also contain high amount of fat, may promote weight gain. The relationship between dietary fat and body weight remains controversial. One of the most popular weight loss diets is actually a high-fat, very high-fat diet. The ketogenic diet has a very high amount of fat, very low amount of carbohydrate. But the type of fat in ketogenic diet is typically animal fat, not fats from plant-based foods. A common myth is that higher consumption of olive oil may promote weight gain because of the high fat content in olive oil. However, this is not supported by current evidence. In the PREDIMET trial, the authors analyzed the association between Mediterranean diet interventions and body weight and waist circumference. As you can see in this figure, all 3 dietary groups lost some weight during the course of the intervention. and the trajectory of body weight were actually similar across the three intervention groups. In the more detailed analysis, the authors found that compared to the control diet, the Mediterranean diet supplemented extra virgin olive oil significantly reduced body weight and also waist circumference. The Mediterranean diet group supplemented with mixed nuts also significantly reduced waist circumference at the end of the 5-year intervention. So those data suggest that Mediterranean diet interventions supplemented with either extra virgin olive oil or nuts may be beneficial for weight control. Several observational studies have analyzed the associations between olive oil consumption and the body weight. In the SUN cohort, also conducted in Spain, the authors found that a higher baseline consumption of olive oil was actually associated with lower likelihood of weight gain. In the nurses' health study and the health professional follow-up study, we found that participants with higher olive oil intake actually had lower BMI levels than those who rarely or never consumed olive oil. This is an analysis we published several years ago, looking at nuts consumption and weight gain. In this study, we found that increased consumption of total nuts, tree nuts, walnuts, and peanuts was actually associated with lower amount of weight gain. So this study provides strong evidence that higher nuts consumption is not associated with increased weight gain or obesity. On the contrary, incorporating nuts, which is also high-fat food, into our diets may be beneficial in weight control and prevention of obesity. In a detailed analysis, we look at changes in different types of fats and risk of weight gain in our 3 large cohort studies. We found that different types of fats may have different associations with weight gain. In particular, increased consumption of animal fat, saturated fat, or trans fat is associated with weight gain, whereas increased consumption of polyunsaturated fat was actually associated with lower amount of weight gain. Increased consumption of total monounsaturated fat is not associated with either increased or decreased weight gain. However, when we separated monounsaturated fat from animal sources, from monounsaturated fat from plant sources, the associations are actually opposite in terms of risk of weight gain. In particular, MUFA from animal sources is associated with increased weight gain, whereas MUFA from plant sources such as olive oil or nuts is associated with a lower amount of weight gain. So in conclusion, higher olive oil consumption was associated with lower risk of type 2 diabetes, CVD, and mortality in our large cohort studies. Those results are consistent with the findings from European populations. We found that substituting of margarine, butter, mayonnaise, and dairy fat with olive oil could lead to reduced risk of CVD and mortality and increased longevity. There is no evidence that increased olive oil consumption is associated with increased weight gain. On the contrary, higher consumption of plant-based MUFAs, such as olive oil and nuts, may prevent weight gain and help weight control. Before I end, I just want to thank my colleagues from our large cohort studies for their contributions to the data that I presented today. And I also want to thank NIH for funding our research. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I would love to invite our panelists back up. We got a ton of questions, so we'll get through as many as we can. And yeah, thank you all for your attention. So I think we'll start off with some questions for Dr. Lamuela Raventos that have come in. You talked about in your research about sofrito and measuring it. So could you share, first of all, explain what sofrito is for people who are unfamiliar with it, and also if there's a certain portion size that is recommended for people to get the benefits that you found in your study?
Yes, sofrito is a typical like Mediterranean sauce that in any very country that is, for example, in Italy has another name and in Greece another name, that is made with, the base is tomato, the main component. But however, you also use virgin olive oil and a lot of onions. We use a lot of onions, like they are ingredients, and also sometimes we use garlic. So there are ingredients that are healthy. However, for me, what is more interesting is that you add these 4 ingredients, they like have synergistic properties and they improve their healthy properties. And we add sofrito. We add sofrito, for example, to pasta, to vegetables, to legumes. And it's, for example, if you want to measure if somebody follows a Mediterranean diet, one of the questions that we have in the questionnaire, if you eat sofrito like 2 or 3 times per week, no? It's a typical Mediterranean south.
Thank you. We also got some questions about the cooking temperature. I know in your experiment, you used 2 different temperatures and 2 different times, but people had questions about even higher heat. So above 170 Celsius to like upwards of 200 Celsius. Do you have recommendations for cooking with olive oil at that point? Is it recommended, or what happens? Is that something you studied?
Yes. Well, I have not studied that myself, but I have read a lot about that. In any oil is bad to use high temperatures and in any food, because when you use high temperatures, you degrade a lot of the healthy components, no? So it's better to use lower temperatures and not to, like sometimes people reuse the oil. This is not good to reuse the oil again, because it starts to oxidate. And then when it starts to oxidate, it's like a reaction that goes very quick. So my suggestion would be to change the oil frequently and not to cook at too high temperatures.
Thank you. And let's see. We had a question also about how we communicate, because in the United States, we don't have that many like health claims for olive oil. So how would you communicate the benefits if you're talking to someone about olive oil?
Well, I think that, for example, Frank Hu, the talk has been very good because he has shown like all the benefits. No, I have not been focusing on the benefits by themselves, but I think that nowadays, extra virgin olive oil, as he has mentioned, no, is very good for mortality, for diabetes. They have anti-inflammatory properties. And there are many references about the benefits of extra virgin olive oil. And nowadays it's also studied for the protection of the neurodegenerative disease. But I think this is very important, no, also. So I think that if you have to tell, because for me, the good thing that has been mentioned by the previous, by Joseph, that the good thing of extra virgin olive oil is that it's coming from a fruit, and yet that you don't have to follow any treatment, any processing. It's like if you press a fruit, no? It's only the juice of a fruit, no? And you don't have almost any treatment, only to clean, to filter, like that it's clean. So this is like you have a fruit with all the components of the fruit, but without the sugars of the fruit. So for me, this is the good thing of the extra virgin olive oil, that it does not suffers any process. But Joseph probably can explain better than me, no? This.
Thanks. And Joe, I know we're running short on time here. So were there any pressing questions that you want to be sure to address?
What I'm happy to do is Kelly, if you could download the questions and that have come in that are sort of in my ballpark, I'm happy to answer them afterwards. But yeah, we're pressed for time. The one thing I want to add to what Dr. Lorenzo said about the cooking temperature. So, as she said, what's important to stress is that this is true for all oils, but when you compare the oils and how they maintain their oxidative stability, extra virgin olive oil, because it's never been processed, it's never been refined, and it's loaded with antioxidants, actually maintains its oxidative stability much better than other oils, even though it has a lower smoke point. So this is a concern that's that we hear often, that you can't cook with extra virgin olive oil, and it's just not true. It's better to cook with extra virgin olive oil than many other oils. But that said, as I said, I'm happy, as I said, to answer all these questions. Good questions about quality and the cold press, first cold press. I saw these questions. They're great questions, and I'm happy to answer them after the fact if we're out of time.
Thank you. So everyone, check your email within 1 week. We'll send you the recording and the slides. And for those of you who sent questions we couldn't get to, we'll see if we can get those answers to you. So thank you, and we hope to see you next week.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.